Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm sure the hall will slowly sort of start to fill up, which it inevitably does. And so thank you all for being here. I'm really excited, actually, about today's session with Jayant Kaikini and V Sanjay Kumar. Shall I drop the V along the way? No? Okay. Okay. Yes, and we're going to be talking about short story and place. I welcome you on behalf of the BIC. So both Sanjay and Jayant and Sanjay, both write fiction that is somehow held, or maybe held is too restrictive a word, maybe released from, shall we say, the place in which the story is taking place. It's really quite an extraordinary thing, and it's not very obvious because not all writers are able to weave the space, the place, the character of the area in which they're talking about into their stories and into their narratives and into the people who are populating their story. So I'm really extremely excited about this, and they're both wonderful talkers and wonderful raconteurs, so it's going to be great. Now the thing is that I'm going to remind you that the biographical notes of both Sanjay and Jayant are on the website of the BIC, but I do want to just spend a little bit of time talking through some things that struck me as I was preparing for today. So Jayant Kaikini, we'll start with you, and of course I'm going to make sure that I don't leave anything out because he has such a long list of achievements. He writes in Kannada, he's a poet, he's a short story writer, obviously an essayist, writes in many different short forms, but he also is a dialogue and script writer for Kannada cinema and writes lyrics for Kannada cinema. So I have to tell you that I often, I have the radio on, All India Radio when I'm driving around, especially in the neighborhood. And, I turned it on and I thought, oh, what's it going to be this morning? Some classical music, some Glory of the Nation, some, blah, blah. But it was Chitrageetegalu, which is cinema music at that moment when I turned it on. And then I'm going, Ondu kanasu, and I'm like, whoa, Jayant, go. It's great. One dream, right? And it was really exciting and it fully energized me. And I was driving like the world was mine, And that too is a song that's really set in place, right? It's about the Kali Pili taxis. So that was very exciting. And for those of you who don't read Kannada, of course, people are lining up to translate Jayant all the time. In Out of Print, we have also a story, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And but for those of you who cannot read in Kannada or are slow readers like me, you also have the privilege of being able to read No Presents Please, which is right here, Jayant, if you would hold it up, which was translated by Tejaswini Niranjana, and it has won many prizes. It was the first, let me make sure I get this right, it was the first book in translation to have won the DSC prize, which is a big deal, really. It's won numerous other awards. I think Tejaswini won also an award, the US National Award for Translation for the book. It's wonderful, and it's stories of Mumbai. So you really, really should get a hold of a copy if you can't, and if you don't find enough copies here and it's sold out, you can find other places to get it. Now, Jayant also won the Karnataka Sahitya Academy Award the first time when he was 19 years old. I can't even imagine it. And then went on to win it numerous other times, 4 other times, I think. And then he's also won the Filmfare Award 4 times for lyrics, and is the recipient of the first Kusum Magraj Rashtriya Bhasha Puraskar, which is also a big honor. Now, the rest of the biographical note, as I said, you can get on the website, but I have to say one thing, Jayant. I just love the title of your new collection, forthcoming collection. It's called Anarkali, a Safety Pin. And so here's Anarkali, what a name, it evokes all this romance and, a little bit of licentious behavior maybe. It's evocative of history. It's this tender bud of a pomegranate flower, and we're worrying about her safety pin, So I can't wait to read it and wait to have it in translation someday. I should read out a quotation from Girish Karnad commenting on Jayant's work. He said, "Very few writers have caught the absurdities, pathos, and comic turmoil that drives life in an Indian city with the vibrancy of Jayant Kaikini." So thank you, Jayant, for being here. Thank you for agreeing so generously to my request to join this session. So it's great having you. V Sanjay Kumar, thank you for suggesting this session. I have to say I had the privilege of having many conversations with Sanjay, many of them not because we have a literary alignment, but because he and my husband get on doing various things together. And so we floated the idea of talking about Tamil Month, which is Sanjay's novel, quite a few times, but it's one of those things that we didn't actually make happen. But the last time we were talking, and we were looking at Ruffled Feathers, which is his new collection of short stories, again available outside, and I'm sure you can get it signed if need be. Sanjay said, why don't we do a session? And then he was the one who sort of motivated it and got it going and suggested the title, Nadu Nammade, which is This Land is Ours, and talk about place. And as I said, both Sanjay and Jayant have their stories much grounded in place, and so it seemed to make the most sense to do that. Ruffled Feathers is wonderful. Really, you walk through a number of different cities. These stories in No Presents Please are in Mumbai. These are different cities and places in India. The opening story, the first story, which is called The Four Caddy, won the first prize in the Bridport Short Story Prize, which is a big deal, in 2018, so congratulations for that. And as today's Deccan Herald Review, congratulations too on that, today's review, describes Sanjay's works, says they're set in a grim world filled with sharp corners, but having deep tenderness and wry amusement, exquisitely balancing absurdity with pathos. So, I mean, pathos seems to be a verb that's used in both your sets of works, but we are not going to talk about pathos, we're going to talk about place. Sanjay, again, Jayant has all these skills, Sanjay too. I mean, he can actually do these mysterious things and manage money, which I think most of us can't do, so that's really exciting. And he's also the director of Sakshi Art Gallery, which is this wonderful cutting-edge sort of space which shows contemporary art. So that, I think, informs your work in many ways, I think. I see it as informing your work. I'm sure you're all sick of hearing me speak, but I just want to contextualize today's session, and then I shall hand it over to Jayant and Sanjay. And what do we mean by place? So our blurb on the website opens with a quotation from Italo Calvino. Thank you for that. Cities, like dreams, are made of desires and fears. But I want to go a little more into what we're actually going to talk about ourselves. And so I came upon a review just very recently that came out in The Beacon by Annie Zaidi of Anupama Raju's new novel, C, which is an interesting experimental work. And Annie says, and I quote, "If a piece of fiction were to be compared to a human body, place is at least one vital organ, if not its beating heart. Where a novel is set, where a piece of fiction, I insert, is set, determines the dank air or sun-bleached or charcoal smoky or tarred or lemony clean air that its characters breathe, their compulsions and neuroses, and ultimately the course of their identity and their destiny, So she goes on to say that if Oliver Twist needed to travel to London in order for him to be entrapped by a life of petty crime with its near-fatal 19th century implications, Jane Eyre needed the isolation of Thornfield Hall, the tenuous safety afforded by employment in a wealthy household in the presence of only one prospective romance for miles around. Jane would have been an entirely different character had she been raised in the back alleys of London. So I think that sort of emphasizes very much how important place is in writing fiction. So let me start with you, Jayant, if that's all right. So your stories in No Presents Please are set in Mumbai. So I'm just going to ask you broadly, Mumbai is the city of dreams. We started with what Italo Calvino says about cities and dreams and fears and desires. And so your characters, they really are very much, they're not just sitting in Mumbai, they're embedded, enmeshed. Their lives are woven into the life of the city. So can you talk a little bit about what inspired you and just tell us about your writing?
Namaskara, ellarigu. I'll try to speak in English.
Of course, yes.
I remember my father was our English teacher in school. He used to tell, British didn't go giving us independence, not because of any freedom fighting or anything. They were scared of your English. They said, we'll save our language, so they ran away. So we can still take revenge on that. Thank you so much for being here. And it's kind of I always feel any get-together after last 2-3 years, this pandemic thing, it's a sammelana of people who have bachao ho gaye, jo bach gaye unka. So it's a reunion, reassuring. So we have learned so many lessons in last 3-4 years. So it's just to move ahead with a lot of positive things. So thank you for calling me here. Yeah, it's always odd to talk about your own works. It's very, very embarrassing too also, because work has it and it has to tell, and we should not be a writer or a painter or a singer. What can a singer can talk about his singing or this thing? So that's very tricky, because more I talk about it, more I think, I'm taking it very seriously. I'm, drawing your attention to this, nothing like that. Maybe I can talk I think ultimately every writer basically is a reader. So from a reader's point of view, I can tell you certain things. And most of these stories in this book are written over the last 3-4 decades. And most of the stories belong to pre-smartphone era. So there is no mobile at all in all these stories. So that itself is a different space. So I am from a small town called Gokarna near Karwar. I studied there, then I studied in Kumta, which is a nearest town, small town, where I went for college. And when I went for college there were triple culture shocks for me. One thing is from home to a hostel. Second, Kannada medium to English medium in college. Then a small town to a larger town. So it was a very interesting thing, and I could not follow what was happening in classrooms because it was in English, chemistry, botany. So everything, I just could not make out. The self-esteem was very, very low. There, that was the space, different space again. To create my own self-esteem up, I started writing things like poems and, songs. I used to write, songs for very famous film songs, like Mera Jeevan Kora Kagaj Kora hi rahega. So Chenne Ninna Chinnadantha Manasu Kadide. So I became like a sought after songwriter in the college. So I also became a sort of, sought after love letter writer also. So all hostel boys used to come to me for love letter. But problem is you have to write it in a different way, each letter. So you have to maintain a different, aura in each. It was very interesting, typical situation. And I remember what an absurd situation. One of my friends, I had given him written him a letter, love letter for his girl. So our days were, the boys will go in a group like this, girls will come in a group like that. And this fellow will look at her, she will look at her, smile, and again passed, it was like that. So we were going, and that girl was in that group, he was here. He smiled at her, she smiled at him. I also smiled like a fool. As if I have some role to play in this, She doesn't know who wrote. See, it was very tricky and I felt so foolish about it. See, this is the how, my writing started. Then I went to Dharwad. Dharwad was don't worry, I will not go into full biographical, yeah. So then Dharwad was a different thing because there were great writers there at that time. Bendre was there, Badagiri Krishna Sharma, and all Kannada bigwigs were there. And it was something very interesting. And in Gokarna, it was very interesting. We used to listen to Mysore language, Mysore Kannada, which we speak here, only in films. Rajkumar, Leelavati, Uday Kumar, we heard them through them. And we heard North Karnataka dialect, Dharwad Bhasha, Henry, Hangadiri, we heard them only in theatre, Natak company. Kondu Tanda Ganda, Ide Tangi Hedada Matu, these kind of plays used to come for our Shivratri Jatri, and we listened to that there. So, whenever I met any Mysorean at that time, and they talk, I used to feel they have come from film industry. And wherever I meet any Dharwad fellow talking, I thought he is making a drama. See how language space also, it's each language puts you in a slot and in a space. So Dharwad was that. And then I went to Bombay. At that time, it was in 1976. After my MSc, I did my MSc in biochemistry. So there also I had a problem, space again. I was not good in chemistry, I was not good in literature. But when I was in chemistry not doing well, I used to feel I have some other world to go back to. I have a writing world, I'm different. And when I come to writing world, there also I felt these people are all Kannada, English, MAs. I am MSc biochemistry. See, these kind of, always you try to, not to get into any slot. That's what a writer's real turmoil, So that's how. So Dharwad, where I again started writing. Then I went to Bombay. At that time, there were no job opportunities here in Bangalore. I tried, I could not, then Bombay. So when I went to Bombay, it was completely different kind of a, liberation for me. It was liberating space for me. Nobody asked me like silly questions like vegetarian or non-vegetarian, vehicle itkondidirro ilvo, itkondiದ್ರೆ ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಹ್ಯಾಂಡೋ ಸೆಕೆಂಡ್ ಹ್ಯಾಂಡೋ, ಸೆಕೆಂಡ್ ಹ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಆದರೆ ಗ್ಯಾಸಲ್ಲಿ ನಡೆಸ್ತಿರೋ ಪೆಟ್ರೋಲ್ ನಡೆಸ್ತಿರೋ. These questions nobody asked me. ಮನೆ ಸ್ವಂತ ಮನೆನೋ ಬಾಡಿಗೆ ಮನೆನೋ, no, at the most क्या काम करता है, ಏನು ಕೆಲಸ, what you work. So that's what it was. It was a working city, workers city. That's why it liberated us. So that was like, like some t-shirts, if there are prints, you don't dry them with prints on it, you make it reverse and dry it. So print ಹೋಗಬಾರ್ದು ಅಂತ. ಆ ಥರ I felt the entire Bombay city made me reverse and put me on the drying string. So there I suddenly found it's a different world, so many languages, so many people. And at the most people you ask you, kya kaam karta hai? So it was like Basavanna says, Kayakada Kailasa. Kayakada Kailasa. It's like Kailasa of work. And I came from Gokarna, where it is Kailasave Kayaka. Where worship is the work. So it was a real transformation for me. So I was just, because you told me, I knew, because I don't remember my stories. So you might ask something, no? So I was just glancing through today, my own stories. as if there's an exam on my stories today. So last moment. And I realized all my characters, Asavari Lokhande, Popat, Shalini Sen, Rupak Rathod, Dagdu Parab, they are not Kannadigas at all.
That's interesting. Yeah.
They are all from other languages. They are not at all Kannadigas. Satyajit Sen, all Madhubani, Madhuvanti, Tufan, all these characters, I suddenly realized. But it's very interesting. So, but they come into my story and they talk in Kannada. They are my characters in Kannada. In a way, I was liberated from a linguistic identity in my writing. It was really liberating and really cosmopolitan, whatever you call. So all the characters, today only I was realizing how all are different characters. They are not a single Kannadiga. Maybe few might come. So that's how that entire, I speak Konkani at home in Bombay. Then I used to speak, and now also I speak Konkani at home. Then in local trains, I talked in Hindi with my commuters. I went to the factory. I worked in a factory, Vicks Vapor factory, for 20 years there. When I worked in a factory with my workers, I talked in Marathi, Gujarati, Hindi. With my boss, somehow I don't know. With my boss, I always fought in English. So that was another thing. And then I came back home in the night and wrote in Kannada. So there were 5-6 languages, multilingual kind of a thing. You know, it was very liberating. So that's how what space you call is like it was liberating thing. You know, everything is liberating. So that liberating, Bombay came to me as a liberating space to understand life through writing. I am not interested in writing about a person who is already happened. You know, like I am very amused by the person who is happening. A person happens in a situation, a person happens, individual evolves in a situation, in a context. I am more connected to that process, what is happening to him, that moment. So that way I feel the Bombay provided that space to me to get lost. That's what whenever people ask me, how do you write, what should we write, that youngsters come in, I said just get lost, I say. Get lost in life. Let the stories find you. Stories will find you. You don't have to go after stories. Just get lost in this absurd, non-literary. Life is non-literary. It has nothing to do with structure, form, anything. Life is just like a flowing water. So just get lost. So then when your probe starts, the content will come to you. Maybe you experienced something 20 years ago, but today if I am writing something, that image will come. Yes. That's how Bombay provided a space to me. Like whatever stories I wrote there, majority of them dwelled on that.
Yes. Thank you. I'll come to some specific, not questions about the stories, but in a way things that struck me about the way in which, you make it sound easy, but I know it's not to write a short story, and how you've woven the city. The characters are in Bombay, there's no question of it. And so I'll come to that in a minute, but, and then at any point, if you would honor us with a reading, we would be thrilled. Oh. Yes. Sanjay, I wanted to ask you, well, first of all, I have to say both Sanjay and Jayant are so prolific, and I feel dreadfully jealous. It takes me about 6 months to write a short story, and then I mull over it and worry over it and go back to it and rewrite it and restructure, rethink, make it into 2 stories. These guys, I don't know how many short stories you've written. Probably, I don't know. I can't even imagine the number of zeros. and you too, you have 5 books already of fiction, and I know you write extensively. So, but your stories, what's interesting to me is that they're set with a short story form. Tamil Month obviously is set in Chennai, but in the short story form, you travel through different places. Some of them are really quite profoundly rooted in the place that you're speaking about. So would you like to address what place means to you in your...
First of all, thanks, Indira, for this session. Thanks, Jayant, for joining me, and wonderful to see all of you here. I'll begin by indicating, where I come from. Like Jayant's spent some time in introducing himself. Uh, we are basically Baniyas from UP. And I was born in Karaikudi, in Ramnath district, third generation in Tamil Nadu. So that was the first, what I call, degree of separation. Second, I was brought up in Chennai. My schooling and college was in Chennai. And in 15 odd years, we shifted 6 houses. So that was 6 landlords, 6 different sets of neighbors. I went to Bombay, then I spent time in 2 paying guests and 1 chamari. Later, in 2 different apartments. Came back to Chennai and thereafter spent time in 4 different homes. Now, with all this background, and I have always, in my career, I've started in finance, went into banking software, then contemporary art, and at a late stage, I went into writing. So writing is just the last 10 years, and like she says, I had the fortune of bringing out 5 books. The question that I'm asked all the time is, where are you from? And my answer, short answer, which I feel like giving is, from somewhere else. And this whole idea, this concept of locating myself, where are you from, is a very tricky question. So the lens that I use in my writing, given this kind of background, is a lens of the outsider. I find that if you spend too much time in a place, if you start to belong to a place, you get lazy, you get set in your routines, you stop exploring your own city. You do not know where the city has grown, you don't go to the new localities, perhaps you don't meet too many new people. So for me, I try and adopt this position of the outsider, that I come into any space as an outsider will. And in my writing, I have adopted the same posture. The first book that I came out with, Artist Undone, had an outsider stumbling into the art world, and his life changed completely. The second book had a Baniya writer looking at events in a particular street in Chennai called Cooperative Colony. He looked at the people, he heard what the street had to say, and he spun his stories. The fourth book, Tamil Month, which I will read from a little, again had somebody from Bombay coming down to Tamil Nadu for some mysterious reason and trying to engineer a political and a caste unrest. So the trope of an outsider, or you can call it the trap of an outsider, is something that I wrestle with in my writing, and that's the posture, that's the lens that I have in any particular place. So I try and capture places using that particular lens. And I'll read briefly. I like to read more than talk. A section from the Tamil Month. It comes pretty early in the book. I arrived as a visitor in Tamil Nadu. We will cut the cloth to suit you, the locals said. I wore what they gave me, and it was the mantle of the outsider. I wore it well, surviving the language, the slow acquaintance with its mores, the almost shy unraveling of its best-kept secrets. After many years in its embrace, I have understood that this Nadu is a country, like Bombay, the one I came from. I have withstood the worst, bearing up even with the singular word called Porambok. I am scared of this word. It tells me that there exists a strip of no man's land at the water's edge that people like me belong to. God knows I have tried to belong. I printed a local calling card that has my local name, Nanban. I married Sharda, she grew up here, and we have a daughter. My daughter has grown and she has 2 questions. Where are we from, she asks, adding a little later, why are we here? I came here from Mumbai, I tell her. Describe the city, she says, since you refuse to go back there. Thinking of the city that made me, now far removed, the visuals that come are of sharp contrasts and brittle edges. Mumbai is a staple narrative, a bandaged muse that hurtles along, and somewhere in its sensual disorder, if you search hard enough, there are compelling reasons for its existence. I tell my daughter, if this country is a garden of weeds, Mumbai is its wildflower. It is a posh, beautiful ruin. Then why are we here? I carry this question, as scientists have before me. Why are we here? Come evening, I accompany Sharda to a classical music performance at the Kalakshetra Auditorium. Under a thatched roof, we sit on cane chairs in the company of elders. Some of them are nodding to the beat, others are just nodding. These elders are Vidwans in their own right, a Chennai speciality called informed audience. The young singer on the dais is good, but the audience raises the bar. She breaks free, soaring to where she has never been. Kalakshetra has me enthralled. I feel small in here, in my place, a comet in an ancient constellation. A stray thought breaks the spell. Why are we here? I should have told my daughter that we are here because my mother died here. We cremated her nearby, and every morning I swim in this ocean because her ashes return with the tide. Sharda sees me fidgeting. Go away, she says. I leave halfway alone. I decide to walk home. It is evening, and as I stand at a store to buy some soda, cell phones come to life around me, glowing in shirt pockets, vibrating in trousers. People shout out intimate details, gesticulating at imagined relatives and friends. The sun blinks and sinks behind some tamarind trees. Birds are nesting, pet dogs are being walked. Street lights flicker and strengthen, illuminating the sandy pavements. I walk the length of Tiger Vardachari Road, following two dancers in plaits and half saris. I cross Velangani Church, where, under tremulous entreaty, Yesu is saving the flock. I turn left onto the beachfront, where waves are forming and waiting their turn. A peg measure waits for me at home. It is ornamental. I am done with dispensations, small and large. I have learned by now to measure drink by the hour. So, the trope of the outsider is something that I try and use extensively. So this character looks at Tamil Nadu from a different perspective, as if discovering it for the first time. And this is the way I try and get readers into the journey. I mean, if you're familiar with a particular place, perhaps something might resonate. If you're not, then you'll join the discovery with the characters that I have created. The other thing that I look at, and I'm very conscious about, is how cities change. So when you try and capture a city, one of the points that you have to look at is what time period. Time is very important. So when I left Madras, Madras was Madras. When I reached Bombay, Bombay was Bombay. When I left Bombay, it was Mumbai. When I came back to Madras, it was Chennai. And a name change is not just a name change. It conjures in your mind a particular city. So what Bombay conjures is different from Mumbai, and same for Madras and from Chennai. And even street names. There's a lovely road in Madras called Chemiers Road, and it has undergone a name change. It is Pasumpon Muthuramalinga Thevar Salai. So the perspective that Pasumpon Muthuramalinga Thevar Salai, the fact that a caste name is used, and he's there, Thevar sir is there with the golden statue where Mount Road starts and Chemiers Road starts. So name, which is a particular time period that you're talking about. When I left Chennai, Mani Ratnam was making films. When I came back to Chennai, Mani Ratnam was still making films. But others were making films as well. Selva Raghavan had made Pudupettai. Pa Ranjit had started making films. So different directors, Vetrimaran had made movies. And I realized how much Madras has changed by looking at how films had changed. The language had completely changed. It was a different city. It's not that films reflect reality all the time, but in some sense, it is what people see, it is what people respond to. It says something about the city, the way films have changed. For some reason, I always find, like, as far as Chennai or Madras is concerned, there is not enough literature which reflects these changes. Perhaps in Tamil, there is enough literature which probably has not been translated. I mean, I can read Tamil, but slowly. But translations are happening more and more. So hopefully more narratives come out from each place over a period of time. So the other thing that I would stress on is capturing a city, again, You cannot capture an entire city. You can perhaps get the essence of a city to some extent, but cities are far too complex, are far too varied, are far too interesting. So there's no sense to trying to say I'm capturing a city. You may capture a road, you may capture a locality, or you may just capture a house. So I think in my writing, I try to be particular, and the last in this entire circle is language. So I walk in the cities that I go to, and when I walk, for example, in Chennai, I look at people staying in houses, but I'm listening to the sound of the street. And I try in my writing to bring in the sound of that street. Because the street has a different culture, the street has a different language. There is a separate bhashai called Madras Bhashai, which has enough slang and enough interesting aspects. I don't want to read from it now, perhaps I'll read from later, a section which indicates what this particular bhashai. Do you want me to finish it now or a little back later? Yeah, sure. So language is the other thing that so when I write about places that I know very well, local language comes into play. If you see these films that I talk about, especially the Vetrimaran films, the kind of English words that, there's these street thugs sitting and they're having a session, and English words are commonly coming into the dialogue. And words that you don't expect are coming into the dialogue. So he mentioned this whole thing about different languages, how languages are fusing, and how words are coming in from here and there. So I think for me, as far as my writing is concerned, to try and capture a city is to try and evolve a language which in some sense captures the city. It's not just what you write, it's how you write. And for me, it's very hard to stay away from local language, from local words. There's a short story in Ruffled Feathers which revolves around this term called Savugaraki. Now, Savugaraki does not mean he's a suicide case. It is like Hindi, you say, "Ghar mein bol ke aaye ho kya?" It's somebody who's taking inordinate risks as if inviting death. So Savugaraki was a term which one story. There was another narrative where Timuru Pudchivan. So Timuru Pudchivan again is a very particular kind of phrase. So stories for me can revolve sometimes just on specific words as well.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you for that. I'd like to lift off from that, in fact, to come back to Jayant, and love to hear your reading along the way. So, in fact, the point that Sanjay makes about different places, Bombay is another city where every area, every place has its own character. And the way in which you interact with the space, I lived in Bombay for many years as well, it resonates with where you are, right? It's not, you move differently, you are engaging differently while you're on the train, in the station, in South Bombay, in Parel. Every place is different. And you really capture that very much. I mean, like in that story, Gateway, for example, where you have Sudhanshu who's out of a job and he's wandering around the place trying to convince people of his worth, I suppose, put it concisely. You start by saying you're at Flora Fountain and the city it's Sunday, and the city is also put on a banyan and is relaxing. I love that. So would you like to comment on all the different places? Because you lived everywhere in Bombay, I think.
Yeah, because as he rightly said, as a bachelor, I think like him, 15 places I have changed in there. So different suburbs, different feel. And before I forget, because you talked about that words, other language words. When Tejaswini Niranjana translated my story, the first discussion was, in my Kannada story, I have retained some Hindi words, like khalas. So whether to keep it or not to keep it in English, so I said, no, it has to be there. Because one of the most spiritual word which I learnt in Mumbai, which made such, which unburdened me was using word for death, off ho gaya. It was so simple. And I heard it from my colleague. He phoned me. जयंत भाई मैं कल नहीं आ रहा हूँ, मेरे को गांव जाना का है. मैं क्या हो गया? मेरा पिताजी ऑफ हो गया. See, that's what it is, you know. And the entire city speaks in singular. तेरे को मेरे को. That I like. It's a city of plurality which speaks in singular. Even the chauffeur will be talking to his boss. क्या रे तेरे को अच्छा है तुम एसी में बैठ के खाता है, हम तो क्या इधर ही पाव भाजी खाएगा. See, that I call it as santa ya salige in Kannada. Salige means you taking each other for granted. Santa is a marketplace. So taking each other for granted in a marketplace. I always feel like like on footpath there will be a lot of plastic things, shops will be there, typical basin mirrors, plastic blue color, and so many things, all plastic. You'll all be standing, so many people will be standing, no, okay, Sadiya. But when you look at all the mirrors together, it's a group photo of all the people bargaining there. See, that kind of a informal bonding in a marketplace, that is the essence. So anybody can talk to anybody. There is no breaking ice. There is no ice at all. So that was what, I think last time I might have shared this, but I have to, like that off ho gaya liberated me. There is another incident which liberated me. It is such a dear incident to me. With all dignity I am sharing. Me and my friend, one Mr. Mukund Joshi, he was in Mulund, so I used to go to his place. He was fond of Agneya. He was teaching in Ruya College, Hindi professor. So we used to go there, and then he came to leave me to the bus stand. It was 9:30 in the evening. There were 2 sex workers there who were also waiting for another bus to go somewhere. So they were not knowing the time, what is the time. So I was talking to him about literature, big, like at that time I think Yashwant Chittal's new novel had come. We were talking about Adhe Adhure literature and all. Suddenly, one of that girl came, she held my hand, turned, oh, no baj gaya, left me and went. See, with that, effortless ease, she came to me, this thing, and later on, Mukund Joshi said, I wish I also had a watch. So she saw this thing, she went away. It was so interesting. Then that itself, prompted us to talk, kaun sa bus ja rahe hai, andheri jane ka hai, 302, 390, something we were talking. Then I had a stardust in my hand. That time. It was an office, you pull in and buy all magazines. So one stardust was here. And I think maybe some star, I don't know, Zinat Aman or Parveen Babi, she was on the cover. That one girl from there, she looked at me, then she pointed to that star. Teri biwi hai kya? She said. See, that was completely, that's how, in one sentence, she made fun of your so-called sane society, the domestic society. You people, आप शादी वादी करते हैं, रिसेप्शन को बुलाते हैं, करते हैं, वो करते हैं. See, in film, see, that entire, she was looking at from that side and she just teased me. तेरी बीवी है क्या? So, these are the things, which can happen only in particular urban spaces. That's how it is. So, another thing is, this thing I am telling, everybody has their own. I never think that I should write about a space. I have never thought. See, for me, the human predicament is always important. The characters are important to me. So if I am impressed by a character, like, see, I have written 75 stories. Out of that, 45, 50 are Bombay, but rest of them are all Bangalore, Dharwad, Gokarna. They are not translated, so others have not, but Kannada readers know about it. Bombay, because for me, the human, what is happening to him? What is it? That person. So when you go there, all these things automatically come to you. Automatically. It's not like a feature writer of a journalist, who I want to write some piece on, Western Railway or on Opera House. It's not like that. You have experienced it so intensely. When you are writing, automatically you are driven there. So that's how it is. That's why my stories are not very well planned, and regarding this, see, this place, this space is, yesterday, Gopal Gandhiji was talking, he talked something so deeply disturbing and so right it was. He says we always use a word called reality in so many ways. Somebody says something, then you ask, really? Sachi? Sach mein hua kya? That's what, what is that sach mein? What is that really? So that is very tricky. It is not the reality, physical, it is not reality like, it's not a physical reality at all. I always feel, children, no, you give them toy, he will play with the toy. You give him some, if he doesn't have a toy, he will take a stone, he converts it into a bus in his mind. Brrr, it becomes a bus. See, it's all in the mind. It is not the physicality of the thing. Same way, when you write, whatever you write is real to you. There is nothing like you write about reality and no, it's what is it. So I will tell one example and finish this. That is about Yashwant Chittal, one of the major writers in Kannada. His novel has come in English. It's Shikari, translated by it's into English. It's a must read. It's a beautiful novel. Pratibha Nadiger. Yeah, Nadiger. Yeah. Beautiful. In 70s, he has written about management harassment. In 70s, he was a marketing director for Bakelite Hylam then, and he has written how games, management games at that time, 70s. So he has written a novel. One day I went to his place. He was staying in Bandstand. I used to go there. So as a bachelor, we used to go there because he will write something and read it to us, and he wanted us to give him frank opinion, so he used to give us a beer also. He didn't know how cunning we were. We already had one bottle at a station and we would have gone there. Because he thinks one mug will start telling reality and all. So there, once I went, it was late, like I was delayed because in Dadar there was a lot of rush. So then I told him, I got stuck in Dadar, late Zale, something. We talk in Konkani. He says, Dadar, when I hear Dadar, I feel sad. I feel a kind of, sadness coming into me. Then I said, why? He said, my Nirmala committed suicide there. Then I know all his relatives. I said, who is this Nirmala who committed suicide in Dadar? Then I remembered, in his novel Moru Darigali, there is a character called Nirmala who commits suicide. But I remembered, but she commits suicide in Bangikodla, that is Karwar, actually. In that novel, she commits suicide in Karwar. But how come that? I thought he is mixed up. I said, but she commits suicide in Karwar. He said, no. I was coming from Hyderabad in Begumpet Express. I was writing that chapter. When she hung herself, bahar dekha, to Dadar had come, he said. Fair to her. He has killed her, first of all. He has made her commit suicide. And he looks out and it is Dadar. So Dadar becomes for him eternally a space where his character committed suicide. So the space need not be, it's a physical space. It's again, as he said, it's a changing, it's a mind space. It may be it may look to one for one person, it may look another for another. While reading, it might look, even when I read my stories again, the space changes. It's like kaleidoscope, you keep moving and the patterns change.
That's very interesting. Yeah. And in fact, apropos your comment about transitions in cities, that's another thing, because Bombay is another city that's always changing. You go to Princess Street, it doesn't look like it did it before. Well, it looked like that for centuries, or a century at least, and now suddenly everything's transitioning. Jayant, would you like to read something, and then we'll go back to Sanjay and you can read? Is that all right? You read in Kannada or English?
I read in English.
Okay.
I'll read points in Kannada.
Which story?
Sometimes people say, no, I'd like to listen to the sound and all. I don't like that.
Okay.
Because there is, you see, unless you hear what you are, what is it? There is no meaning in telling, reading something in a language. Especially when you go abroad and all, no?
Yeah.
Then I say, I can read anything here. I can read Prajamani headlines and tell them it's my poem. They will say, wow, 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 very good. I love the sound. It's interesting.
So which story will you read from? Yeah. Can I help you?
I'll first read Kannada. I'll read one small paragraph in Kannada for the sound of it. ಶಾಲಿನಿ ಸೇನ್ ಹೆಸರಿಗೇನೋ ಹೊಳಪಿದೆ. ಕಳೆದ 39 ವರ್ಷಗಳಿಂದ ಇದೇ ಗ್ರಹದ ಮೇಲೆ ವಾಸಿಸುತ್ತಾ ಬಂದಿರುವ ಈ ಶಾಲಿನಿ ಸೇನ್ರ ವರ್ತಮಾನ ಹಠಾತ್ತನೆ ಈಗ ಈ ಸತ್ಯಜಿತ್ ದತ್ತಾನ ವರ್ತಮಾನದ ಸಮೀಪ ಸುಳಿಯುವ ಚೋದ್ಯ ಅದೆಂಥದು. ಓಕೆ, ನೌ ಐ ವಿಲ್ ಶಿಫ್ಟ್ ಓವರ್. ಚಾನೆಲ್ ಚೇಂಜ್ ಕರೋ. Shalini Sen. The name had some sparkle to it. She had been living on this earth the past 39 years, and suddenly her existence and Satyajit's had come close to one another. Perhaps he thought she was the child of a migrant family which had come here seeking a livelihood. Perhaps family had never quite settled down. She would have learned to walk somewhere in this city and grown up seeing lakhs of faces other than his. Speaking Bombaya Hindi, painting her nails in a girlfriend's house, dancing the Garba during Navratri, going to the sea for the Ganesha immersion, shouting Moria, and returning home soaking wet and swaying in the truck. This city had kept telling her, everything will be fine, everything will be all right. And then suddenly let go her hand. She would have shuddered at that. Left alone in the chal, she continues to apply Vico turmeric cream on her face. She despairing, angry, gets up in the middle of a meal and puts her slippers on to go outside. Avoiding her friends, telling them lies, she hides in a secret mirror. You are so lovely. Why aren't you married yet? The loudspeakers from the marriage pandals blare. Her face has suddenly aged. The hair at her parting turned grey. She has lost the right to sulk like a child. She daydreams about Pakya, who sells paper lanterns, or Keku, who runs the cassette shop. Slowly, like a book on the corner of a lower shelf in a library, a book no one reaches out for, she has acquired her mother's posture and her mother's silence.
Sanjay. Yes. Thank you. Speaking of words, speaking of transitions, yes.
Yeah, I'll pick up the thread from what I said last time about language. There are two sets of readings that I will do. Both are reasonably brief. The first is from Tamil Month. The second is from the book Ruffled Feathers. So in Tamil Month, I wrote these four youngsters, and I was to some extent inspired by this movie called VIP. I like movies where Dhanush acts, and all the movies I mentioned earlier all had Dhanush in them. And VIP also, Dhanush was starring, and VIP stands for Vela Illa Pattadhari. Vela Illa Pattadhari means unemployed graduate. So these three basically come from that background. So I spent a lot of time writing these four characters. Coincidentally, one was a Brahmin who renounced his caste, one was a convert Christian, one is a suspected Muslim, and one is the caste which the book is all about, which is the Gaundar caste. So this section describes these four. Their songs were Gana Pattu. The women they called Figure. They sang Gana to a Tappan beat on the open terrace in the midst of pipes and clotheslines. It was full galata. They leapt, they sprang, and the hip thrust was jalsa. In their mind was drunken Godal. And there was hurt, hurt that came from love. This love was unfulfilled puppy lust, an unbearable yearning. They surprised themselves by their success in stealing. They had few principles, and in their upbringing, there was no risk manual. If you saw the four of them ride motorcycles, as they often did in Besant Nagar, you would dismiss them as local rowdies. They drove recklessly in and out of traffic, ogled girls as obviously as they could, and sometimes passed comments. They were forever looking at their reflections, adjusting their hair and dark glasses, and they would swagger to every pan bidi shop to buy cigarettes one at a time. Cigarette buying was a ritual, smoking a mere aftermath. They were non-vegetarians, and watching them eat was torture for families. They kept bones in their mouth, sucking loudly, cracked and chewed the chicken joints, and left the debris on the table around their plates. Each meal looked like a vulture's feast. Ponnusami, Muniandi, Talapakatti, these restaurant names appealed to them. They sounded like a frontal assault on Brahmins. Those pussies ate vegetables and curd rice in placid places called bhavans. They liked very few Brahmins because the community was small-minded. How much money others made bothered them. High caste did not invite people home. High caste plucked flowers from neighbors' houses. In the perimeter of their existence, high caste knew where the last Naya Paisa was. Why are you sucking up to this Nanban character? Kari asked. Firstly, he calls himself Nanban. The name is not right. He's nobody's friend, said Valiban. Is he rich? Valiban laughed aloud. What a stupid question. What I want to know is why he's lying low here, pretending to be nobody. He's a Hindi and he speaks Tamil. He must be a central spy, like those shady fellows in the Hindi Prachar Sabha who roam around Dakshin Bharat in plain clothes. He behaves like a spy. He has a figure in Besant Nagar, a woman called Sharda. They are intimate. Arg. I want to have Brahmin sex, said Andoni. Milk and fruit on the side table, rose petals on my bed, and one plump jolly. I want to star in a Sami Padam, said Thambi. A Sami Padam was an X-rated film that began with devotional songs just to fool the cops. Once they left the cinema hall, the sex scene started. Minor, said Kari, are you a genuine high caste? Only by birth, said Valiban. And Thambi is a gounder, a middle caste. That makes sense, said Kari. Thambi is closer to a monkey than you are. So, basically, the use of the local language to try and convey a sense of place, I don't know if it, based on the reaction, it seems to make sense to some people, but perhaps to people who are not aware of Tamil, I'm not sure how much that would. Can I briefly read?
I did want to make one comment, actually. No, I think that even if you don't know Tamil, I think that you have, you may not get the word or the precise connotation, but you get a sense of the vibrancy of things, right? Yeah. I remember that one of the early Lekhanas, it was, I think, took place in the NJMA, which Arshia had organized, and URA was there as well. He was, and there was a discussion on writing about the city. And as I recall, one of the things that came out is Bangalore is one of the few cities that does not evoke, a response from people. People don't really write about the city. That was then. I wasn't, I wasn't sure. I was convinced of that, but that seemed to be sort of the idea that came out. And I was very struck by your Bangalore story, and I wondered if you could read a little from it. It's today is September 4th. I don't want to make a big deal of it, but it is very much triggered by Gauri Lankesh's assassination, the story, I mean, and tomorrow is the day on which she was assassinated 5 years ago. And so I wondered if you would just read a little bit from it. It's an extraordinary story, again, about the anxiety, if I may sort of paraphrase it a little bit, or summarize it, that is caused in a writer by her assassination, So.
in terms of writing short stories as against writing a novel, and I'm sure your experience is the same. In a novel, you have a lot of room, a lot of space, and you can, you have far more creative license to describe what you want. You can go into Puck Dundies, you can do pretty much what you want, and you can come back. Some readers may abandon you, but some may be okay by it. Yeah. So in short stories, what I find is that there is no space really to get into descriptive writing. Yeah, you have to keep things very tight. So what I'm going to do now is read from this short story that you mentioned, and I'm going to describe very briefly two aspects of Bangalore, and very briefly two characters who I'm trying to capture in just a few words. The story is called The Writer. I stay in Whitefield, a suburb of Bangalore that has many malls, a lake, and gated communities. The gated enclaves have Roman names. Their internal roads are called boulevards. They are paved with interlocking tiles and are lined on both sides with flower beds and decorative palms. The entrance to the Il Palazzo enclave has freestanding pillars. The mansions have Corinthian columns, and the clubhouse resembles the Parthenon. I dropped in on a Sunday to meet a friend and wandered around as I was early. I am a visual eavesdropper. It is what I do. Peeping into people's homes is possible in most Bangalore streets. Even a casual glance can lay bare a life being lived. Not at the Il Palazzo. Tall trimmed hedges ring-fence each mansion. Brocade curtains hang heavy behind every window. The place was quiet that Sunday. The wind picked up occasionally. Wind chimes whistled, small bells tinkled. Imported dogs picked up scents and poked their snouts through fences. A quick bark, a tail wag, and they bounded away. I stood for a while, taken in by the orderliness of this little utopia. The clean lines, the cropped lawns, the paved driveways where the grass had been allowed to grow in small gaps along the edges, like liner notes in a symphony. Staying in these affluent islands are expatriates and local millennials, their knobby knees hidden by Bermuda shorts. On weekends, they wear quarter socks and large sports shoes, speak in unfaithful accents, and move around in terrible twos and threes. Friday and Saturday, they share their laughter over brews in pubs paneled with dark wood. They watch football, eat sausages, and cheer players who queue up in transfer windows and make millions. So this is just one small section about an affluent suburb. The other section, I'll now speak about a character, how quickly one has to describe a character. I wrote about a crow, about my father, my old man. I never thought of him as old till he aged one day trying to get up from his cane chair. The crows cawed outside our home. Everybody knows how the crow caws. Ka, ka, that is what we call it. A kaka cannot sing. Its call lacks lilt, its tone has no texture. Through the year and its seasons, it sounds the same. The thing is, the crow is aware of its limitations. It doesn't mean to sing. The crow doesn't hide. It is not good looking, and it has no disguise. There are better looking birds like the quail, but the crow, it has intelligent eyes. They are curious. You can see the world through a crow's eyes. In the heat, the crow simmers. By noon, it is a step away from exploding, its dark skin and feathers having absorbed radiation. In the rain, it sits exposed, perched on a tree. It flaps its wings, shivers and caws. It doesn't complain. My father is the same. Consider him a crow. So I'm trying to describe another character very briefly, and this is something that you may all respond to. My neighbor has a mango tree, a large one, and its branches are spread over my rare veranda. I like the shade and I do not mind clearing the leaves that fall. In season, the mangoes grow in front of my eyes and gradually ripen. A quail bird sings lustily as I sit with a cup of tea and survey the harvest. It is inevitable that I pluck a mango or two. My neighbor watches constantly. He can sense the temptation and is disturbed by it. He is older than me, a frugal man, bespectacled and lonely, prone to counting the mangoes on my side. I fell out with him early on when he introduced himself. I'm an Orthodox Brahmin, he said. You, sir? He was asking. I am against orthodoxy, I said. I hold it in contempt. I see, he said, without rancor, blinking rapidly, weighing his response. Orthodoxy has its uses, you know, I said. It keeps a section of the population in rein, people like you. He looked surprised. I am a potential threat, sir? To whom? To the idea of revolution, I said. Are you an activist? Forgive me, I have never met one. He wouldn't go away. I looked towards the door and raised myself slowly. Is it worthwhile being a writer, sir? He asked.
Is it worthwhile being a writer, sir? Yes, I don't know whether we should open up to questions, but before we do, was there anything you wanted to add, Jayant? Say something, yes?
No, nothing in particular, but I'll tell a couple of incidents which later came into my story. So that's one is there was a frame maker shop in Mulund. So once I went there for something, so for giving some framing something. So then he was cleaning the shop for Diwali. And there were some, framed photographs kept there. I just went on looking. So there was some, there is a Vivekananda, there was some scenery, then there were some people also, middle-aged one. This it. I told him, "Idhar kyun rakha hai? Why this?" He said, "Mangta hai kya? Leke jao." I said, "Why? What is the problem?" "नहीं, आपको चाहिए तो लेके जाओ. You take it." I said, I can understand Vivekananda and Gandhiji, but what about these three people? I mean, there's some. It was obvious that people give for enlarging photographs when somebody passes away, looking from some old or taking it from a group photo. It was something like that. There was something to do with obituary with those things. But he said, "Oh, क्या है? वो देके गया frame के लिए 3 साल हो गया आया नहीं लेके जाने के लिए." See, someone has given photos for framing and they have not come at all to collect it. So there is a story there.
Maybe also offer here.
Yeah, correct. So that's how it is. It was lying with me, it was with me. So then one day when I was writing, it came. That's how it is, I can't go home and say it's a nice thing, I will write today. It never happens that way.
Yeah.
It has to come in search of me when I'm searching for something,
Yes.
some meaning, understanding life. Like Yashwant Chittal says, again I quote him, he has influenced me so much. He says, "I don't write what I know, I write to know." That he is my guru in that way. I write to know. Whatever the story is it's a gift to me because before I wrote it, that was not that. That story was not there. I write to know. So that's how it is. Another incident was very typical. That has also came into my another story. That was there is a called Monkey Bridge, in Matunga. A long Z bridge is there. It's long railway over bridge. It's very crowded. So one day we are all going, and suddenly we saw one person was having fits, that epilepsy attack. He was all struggling there, and it was very interesting. People were, "Arey, usko pani de do." Somebody gave pani and somebody this thing, and he went and somebody started fanning. He also went. So the moving crowd was taking care of him while moving itself. The crowd was moving and he was being taken care of. One fellow is doing baito, kidhar jata hai, then all this. And then they wanted to, at that time there was no mobile, so they wanted to see whether they can phone somebody. So they looked, there was a paper in his pocket. That paper they removed. It was a very funny kind of there was a diagram there. It was like a, map drawn. It looks very funny. Somebody said, "ये कुछ underworld का लगता है." Maybe it's underworld. So maybe इसका आधा और किसी के पास होगा. दोनों जब मिल जाएंगे किधर भी कुछ भी हो सकता है. So everybody was suddenly looking at him as a potential danger. Then there was a small kid who was going with his father. So he saw that, and he was very bright, and he was looking as if, why these people are not seeing what I am seeing. And then he said, "ये तो पाँव का निशानी है." Means that paper he had drawn, the size of his child's this thing with pencil for buying a footwear. Earlier, we used to do that, You put your this thing, then with pencil you take a map lene ka, pav ka. So he had taken that map for his child's buying a footwear. But everybody saw there is a bomb blast in that map. See, but that child could see it. See, another child could see it. So this is how it is, like that also, it was incident just like that, but it stayed with me. It came later on when some this. So it's how certain things, they happen and they stay with you and they stay in your subconscious and they come. We can't plan and write them. It's like, there was a magician who used to come to our school. He will eat lot of colorful papers. Just he will eat, drink water, and then he will start last, pulling out ribbons and ribbons and ribbons of colorful this thing. That's how writing is all about. So we have to just gulp it. As I told, we should get lost so that our stories will find us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jayant. Really, those stories are marvelous. Both books. You really have to. Well, all the books.
And I must thank Tejaswini Niranjana for translating this. It's a translation is a very big, risk.
Yes, that's a whole other conversation, actually.
Yes.
Really.
But I always feel translations are always safer in the hands of a poet. Because poet is tuned to the unsaid. The dhvani, what you call, you try to write something, but at the same time you are evoking something else. So that is intact. So always poets translation, something is still intact. So I thank Tejaswini Niranjana for translating my stories.
And I thank Pratibha Nedigar, Umashankar Nedigar, for the translation of, well, of course, of Yashwant Chittal, but also she translated the story that appeared in Out of Print. So I always remember her. She came to me, once and we said, she said, I'm translating this work from Jayant, may I? And so, yeah. Yes, and while we're saying thank you, I have to thank BIC as well. Everything's gone so wonderfully and smoothly and organized. So thank you for that in case I forget when people have questions. So if anyone has a question, please come up to the mic here. Do you mind coming up? Is that easier? Oh, you have a handheld mic? Okay, great. Okay, great. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. So if you want, it's easier for recording if you're here. Do you mind coming up? No? Okay. So, Lekha, you'll have to pass the mic there, I'm afraid. I think, oh, all right. Yeah, okay, after that.
Yeah, hi. I went to Paris one time and somebody told me that best way to experience Paris is to once experience it as a starving artist, then as a decadent industrialist, and then as a senile old man. What is the similar filter for Bangalore? Because I came up as a struggling IT guy, established IT professional now, and my experience hasn't really changed much. It's traffic and idli, and so what is that similar filter for Bangalore?
What is a filter for writing about Bangalore?
Yeah.
Well, I shall let Sanjay or Jayant answer that.
My limitation is that I have been in Bangalore just for the last 6-7 years. And while I have seen Bangalore change over the years as a visitor, what I miss, and which I think is something which Jayant will probably respond better, is that I don't know the local language at all. That's one. And secondly, I haven't spent time in too many localities of Bangalore. So it's not a city that I've got to grip with. Perhaps what you need to do is what Jayant and I have done quite often, which is keep changing your house. And maybe after a few house changes, you might get a better grip of traffic notwithstanding.
I think the other, if I may sort of jump in, I think the other way to find your paths through any city is to really get off the traffic streets, actually, and walk through the neighborhoods. And that's when you begin to get a sense of people, our little neighborhoods. Yesterday, I was in a locality that I kind of know, I'm familiar with, but I walked into a little sub-area of it, and you see that there are all these old houses, neighborhood, people who have lived there for many years, they know each other, they're very, very protective of parking space, you know, they come and speak to you, but they're also at the same time like curious as to why you're suddenly in their neighborhood. They show you things, you have conversations. So I would say that any way to get to know a city in a way is to enter it at a different level.
Yeah, nothing much whatever you have said. See, idea is you should first ask yourself, why should I write? Why am I writing? Why should I write? Why am I writing? So then things become clear. So I want to understand this city, whether I want to understand life in the context of this city. See, it's usually we start as a mirror always, you know, writing is like a mirror, we say, but suddenly it becomes a window. It has to become a window. I mean, you know, ultimately we are writing to understand the situation, understand the city, understand the human world around us. So that will make things clearer, you know. So I think you should focus on a plight of a man, a character, a person. So start from that. The human mind is the one. Then it will take you into the intricacies and very special things about this city or any city that way. That you cannot, writing about Vidhan Saudha or writing about traffic jam or writing about Vidyarthi Bhavana will not make it a Bangalore story.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
It has to be a different kind of a feel, you know, the collective mind. Every street has, I got that. Every city has a collective mind, one mind. You know, you go to Borivali, you go to Churchgate, you go to, you know, Kalyan, you go to Nalasupara. It's maybe marginally some differences are there because, you know, like, it depends on which area it is, but the mindset is same. Like, I think Bangalore is in the making of that still. It is still in the, you know, that collective mind has to evolve because each area has very interestingly different these things. Yeah. So maybe you can grasp Bangalore in bits, you know, like South Bangalore will have something, you know, Whitefield has a different kind. Even, you know, that was,
maybe some cities are like that. Actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think someone has the mic there and then Prem after that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm a student at Christ. We have your book, No Presents Please. We had a discussion around it in a course called Urban Narratives. So my postmodernist classmates and my Marxist self had some disagreements on the concept of alienation that I think is present in your stories. And so the debate that we always have in class is whether alienation that the city provides is it always healthy as it is romanticized? Like, you know, I can smoke a cigarette near where I live, but in my hometown I have to go 5 kilometers away so that no one recognizes me. So with the alienation, is liberation necessary, or that alienation always invites something more sinister, that is commodity fetishism, in my opinion? So in your story, the partner is always chasing something else, and that chase is always behind some wealth, something or the other. His fetishism is with.
Shall we let Jayant answer?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, so, yeah.
Sorry, I'm a nervous speaker, so I speak.
No, that's fine. Yeah.
So,
Thank you. I mean, like, see, it's again a human predicament. Every individual is very unique, you know, every person is very unique. I always feel that. Every person. And there is society in every person, you know, like we have society, we carry it with us. So if you get into that, things will, you know, come around that. So I never thought that this is alienation or this is, no, that is maybe like we call post-event, you know, we can talk about it academic, you can, you know, analyze it different, but I can't do that because I just wrote it. And I should ask the characters why you behave like this at the most, why you did this to me, why you didn't happen. So for me it is very real, you know, to me, because I have created them and I have felt them. So I'm happy that your group has discussed it and, you know, experienced it. So my compliments, my thanks to all of you. Thank you.
I like your point about how your characters, in a way, they create themselves, right? I mean, through you. Yes, Prem.
Yeah, there's a conventional thinking that the authenticity of place comes from a culture that has taken root. But we've heard today a different kind of authenticity about being in an anonymous place where people don't ask questions, about getting lost, about changing house many times, about lens of an outsider, about an unexpected turn of phrase, perhaps in a different language. And it seems to me that then the rooted culture perhaps becomes habitual and unthinking, and one must be like what the Zen teacher Shunryu Suzuki said, that in the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, in the expert's mind only a few. So my question is this: does that also translate into your writing? Like, do you look at the space of the text you're creating, whether it is a short story or a poem, and even there, do you need to get lost and be an outsider?
In terms of rooted culture, in terms of fiction representing rooted culture, one way to look at it, perhaps, it's a good question, is perhaps that it's not so much the description or the elaboration of the culture that is really that important. For me, you can get to the essence of what a culture is in different ways, but you can get to it. The success or failure of being able to depict a particular culture really depends on finally the reading experience. But I think there are different ways to capture that. And it's perhaps, there are different ways of writing novels, different ways of making films, different forms of poetry. And there's a variety that exists. And some of that could succeed irrespective of form in capturing that rooted culture, and a lot of it could fail as well. So I would really not go in terms of what is the approach in terms of capturing that culture as whether it does or not.
I mean, in a sense, I also wonder whether it's is it really an either or? It's not the writer is the observer and the narrator in a sense, or the conduit for the story. But it doesn't mean that they are necessarily rooted or not rooted, but they've stepped out of it in order to observe it, is one way of thinking of it. So it's not as if I think it's saying that you're rejecting the idea of the culture of the city or the community or the space or the entity, but really that you yourself are stepping away from it a little, is somehow one way of thinking of it, I thought.
Does it make sense, or you have any follow-up to that?
Yeah, you look like you're not agreeing. Yes.
All right.
There was someone in yellow. Oh, yes, go ahead, come.
Okay. So, from both speakers, it seems to me that a lot of the stories are written about the cities through its people. And I'm wondering two things. The first is that always the case? Are we understanding the cities through the people? Is it going to be anthropocentric? Or is there ways to understand the city through the space itself, to the spaces in it? And if that's the case, if it's the people that make the stories of the cities, have either of you, whenever you've written, you, for example, have written about so many different identities itself, not being or holding those identities. So it's of course, it's a question that I also wonder when you're writing on behalf of someone. Do you feel like you're doing enough justice to that story of that character? Are you encapsulating that struggle or that predicament enough in your stories?
Can you just repeat the first part of the question? Yeah.
The first part is, when you're writing about cities, is it always just through its people, or do you feel like the space influences any aspect of how
I think
the
I'll
story
go with
develops?
what Jayant basically said, that when you're writing, you're not conscious, particularly conscious of your check boxes, that am I doing characters, am I doing place, am I doing time, is there emotion, is there some meaning? I don't think really narratives function very organically, at least in my experience, and perhaps that's what Jayant as well said. So it's not an organic approach. It's perhaps a more intuitive approach. It's perhaps sometimes a hit and miss kind of approach. And they are amorphous form. Stories are amorphous form. They take their own shape as you keep writing. So in my case, I write characters first. And when I'm writing characters, I'm looking at just writing the characters. I'm not looking at place at all. Obviously, at some point in time, those characters will be in a particular place. And then the characters respond to each other, behave with, and the behavioral aspects of characters with each other, perhaps to some extent, are dictated in the city that you are in. You know, description of cities, for example, you know, I would say Chennai, for example, as a city, is like a dowager. Mumbai is a bachelor. And Delhi is always on the fulcrum of offense. I'm saying, broadly speaking. So these kind of thoughts can be there, and these kind of thoughts can get conveyed in terms of what does time mean in a city? What is the pacing of a city? So time is a little more measured with fixed income in Chennai. Time is bedlam and noise and very precious in Bombay. So how time reflects, how the stories pace, how characters treat time. So there are many aspects of a city which come in through how characters behave to respond, what they do in given situations. The situations that occur in cities tend to be a little more particular. So what happens, like, as a raconteur, he has been describing wonderful stories through the evening of his experiences in Bombay. And I respond because I know Bombay as well. I've written about Bombay as much, perhaps. But he has a very particular sense of certain aspects of the city and the incidents. So all he's relating to you this evening are incidents, situations. So situations and incidents will, in his case, describe a city very well. And characters, of course.
I mean, it's a fine point. For example, in the first story, in No Presence, Please, which is set in this cinema theater, old cinema theater in Bombay, the character, he couldn't be sitting in a cinema theater in Bangalore or a cinema theater in Navi Mumbai or a cinema theater in somewhere else. It's really set in Bombay. Yes, Opera House, and he moves here and there. The characters who come in, the chaiwala, the nighttime life, the sex workers down the street, his relationship with them. It's very much meandering through these spaces, right? And yet, it's the character, really, who you're talking about. I mean, I think every writer writes differently, too. I mean, often my stories just start with a random sentence that I don't even know where it's going to go to, and then, yes. We have a last question, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask, the nature of cities themselves have changed, right? Like if you look at maybe 30, 40 years back, the world that maybe I and maybe my parents grew in, and that's where I related very much to No Presence, Please, is I could probably see at a city from your eyes, but also in some sense my parents' eyes as well. They also grew up in like Kumta, Karwar, and then they migrated as just like you, and there are parallels to that. But what we see now is all of the cities seem to have, at least there's a large migrant population, and that has happened over the years as well. But there is a certain sameness, right? Like, I mean, everybody kind of sees the same, there's a lot of marketing. There's also, every city has a metro. Every city kind of started looking the same because of apartment blocks. People also, unlike seeing Doordarshan, they also see like Netflix and Squid Games. So there is a human element, obviously, to it, but is the character of the city kind of dissolving? Because, you go to a mall in Gurgaon or you go to a mall in Bombay, but as you said, the city also is also represented by this, by its culture. Like in Chennai, you have this musical festivals, or in Bombay, you have this theater and movies.
Yes.
So how has that changed? How does the current milieu actually reflect in terms of the character? If you want to contrast.
Yeah, details. Like there is kind of a monolithic kind of things happening. Like from earlier, that's what we are talking, from Bangalore to Mysore, if you are going, earlier even in semi-sleep, now Srirangpatna aa gaya, igid bantu. And by looking at that one tree or some old school, something, the topography was very clear. Now it's highway, express highway, you don't see anything. And you go to any small towns also, branded shops, they look the same. So that thing, but each city, ultimately, there is something peculiar to that city in the sensibility will be there. Like, I also feeling, because I have not been going to Bombay much as I used to go earlier. But last time I went, I could not get into the train, local train. So I was feeling whether I missed the train for the rest of my life. But then, next day I got into the train and my pocket was picked. It was like Bombay city telling me, Baba, Bombay karke tum bahut chala rahe ho. Chalo, come back now, show you. So, see, it was like a leveler, like it was very funny. I mean, it was very interesting experience. But you are right, things change, things will change. But what any writer will have his active time, and what details matter to me. Today's writer will have some other details which evokes him or which will help him evolve as an individual, collective individual. So you are right, things change, they keep changing, absolutely.
But there's always stories.
Yeah, stories. As long as man is there, see, that's what, in writing workshops and all, that's what I tell. Every day that, Haveriinda baro bassu 9 ಗಂಟೆಗೆ ಬರಬೇಕಾಗಿದ್ದ ಬಸ್ಸು, ಓಕೆ, ಇವತ್ತು ಬರಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಸ್ಟೋರಿ ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಟೆಡ್. ಯಾಕೆ ಬರಲಿಲ್ಲ ನನಗೂ ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲ, ಬರೆದವನಿಗೂ ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲ. ಐ ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಟ್ಸ್ ಹಾವೇರಿಯಿಂದ 9 ಗಂಟೆಗೆ ಬಂದು ಮುಟ್ಟಬೇಕಾಗಿದ್ದ ಬಸ್ಸು ಮುಂಡಗೋಡ್ ಬಸ್ ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡಲ್ಲಿ ಇವತ್ತು ಬರಲಿಲ್ಲ. ದೆನ್ ಅದು ಯಾಕೆ ಬರಲಿಲ್ಲ, ದೆನ್ ದಟ್ಸ್ ಹೌ ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್. ದ unknown next line is the essence of a writing actually. Unknown, the transparent next line is what, it's like the enigmatic tomorrow. As simple as that. Thank you.
Well, thank you both very much indeed. I think I have so many more thoughts and questions and interesting things that I'd love to probe with you, perhaps another session. You were both fantastic, as always. Thank you for the readings, for the stories, for the thoughts. Thank you to the audience, and yes, another wonderful short story session. Thank you.